My parents invited my secret half-brother to live with us and wanted to sell my inheritance to help him. When they tried to sell my dream car for him, I lost it. I never thought I'd be in this situation, but here I am, wondering if I'm wrong for hating my long-lost brother. I'm Ava, 17F, and my life turned upside down 3 months ago when my parents dropped the bombshell on me. Growing up, I always thought I had a pretty normal family. My dad, Mark, 45M, works as an architect, and my mom, Rhonda, 43F, is a high school English teacher. We live in a cozy suburban house with a big backyard where Dad built me a treehouse when I was 8. It's still my favorite place to read or hang out with friends. I've always been close to my parents, especially my dad. Every summer since I was little, we'd go on camping trips to Lake Superior. Dad taught me how to fish, start a campfire, and identify constellations. Those trips are some of my favorite memories. Mom and I have our own special bond too. She's the one who introduced me to classic literature, and we have a 2-person book club where we read and discuss a new book every month. Last year, when I was struggling with algebra, she spent hours after work helping me study until I finally understood it. Being an only child, I got used to having my parents' undivided attention. Sure, sometimes I wish for a sibling to play with or confide in, but mostly I enjoyed being the center of my parents' world. They came to all my soccer games, cheered the loudest at my school plays, and always made time to listen when I needed to talk. It all started on a regular Tuesday evening. I was in my room, working on a history project about the Civil War, when my mom called me downstairs. Usually, this meant I was in trouble or had forgotten some chore, so I quickly ran through my mental checklist of things I might have messed up. But when I got to the living room, both my parents were sitting there with serious expressions. "Ava, we need to talk to you about something important," my dad said. Those words made my stomach twist. Was someone sick? Were we moving? I sat down on the old leather armchair that used to be my grandfather's, bracing myself for bad news. My mom took a deep breath and started, "Honey, there's something we should have told you a long time ago. Before we got married, your father was in a previous relationship." I nodded, confused. This didn't seem like earth-shattering news. Lots of people have relationships before they get married. I knew my parents had dated other people before meeting each other in college. Then my dad continued, "What your mother is trying to say is, I have a son from that relationship. You have an older half-brother." I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. A brother? How was this possible? Why was I only finding out now? My mind raced with questions, but I couldn't seem to form words. As it turns out, my dad had gotten his high school girlfriend, Melissa, pregnant when they were both 18. They were young and scared, but they decided to try and make it work for the baby's sake. Their son, Jacob, was born just after they graduated high school. Dad described those early years as a struggle. He worked 2 jobs to support the baby while trying to take night classes at the local community college. Melissa dropped out of college to take care of Jacob. The stress and responsibility took a toll on their relationship, and they fought constantly. When Jacob was just over a year old, Melissa got a job offer in California. She wanted a fresh start, away from the small Midwest town where everyone knew her as the girl who got pregnant in high school. My dad, torn between his dreams of becoming an architect and his responsibility to his son, made the difficult decision to let Melissa take Jacob to California. They agreed that Dad would send child support and visit when he could. At first, Dad tried to maintain a relationship with Jacob. He'd call every week, send birthday and Christmas presents, and visit during summer breaks. But as the years went by, the distance and the growing gap in their lives made it harder to stay connected. Melissa remarried when Jacob was 5, and her new husband adopted Jacob. After that, the visits and calls became less frequent. My dad met my mom in college a few years later. He was honest about his past, and my mom accepted it. They fell in love, got married after graduation, and had me when they were in their late 20s. Dad said he always meant to tell me about Jacob, but as time passed, it became harder to find the right moment. I sat there in shock as my parents explained that Jacob, 27M, had recently reached out to my dad through social media. He wanted to connect with his biological father and learn about that side of his family. My parents had been in contact with him for the past month, and now they wanted to invite him to stay with us for a while. We thought it would be a good opportunity for all of us to get to know each other, my mom said gently. Jacob's coming next week, and he'll be staying in the guest room for a couple of months. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This stranger, this half-brother I never knew existed, was going to be living in our house? I had so many questions and emotions swirling around in my head. Why didn't they tell me sooner? How could they just invite him to stay without asking me first? The next week was a blur of preparation. My parents were excited, cleaning the house and getting the guest room ready. They kept trying to engage me in the preparations, asking what I thought Jacob might like or if I wanted to help make welcome signs. but I couldn't bring myself to join in their enthusiasm. I felt betrayed and angry. I retreated to my treehouse, spending hours up there trying to process everything. I thought about all the times I'd wished for a sibling, but this wasn't what I had in mind. I'd imagined a little brother or sister to play with and protect, not a fully grown adult with his own life and history. When Jacob arrived, it was even worse than I had imagined. He looked so much like my dad that it was unsettling. They had the same crooked smile and the same way of running their hand through their hair when they were nervous. My parents hugged him like a long-lost son, which, I guess, he was, and he seemed eager to get to know all of us. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he was an intruder in our home. Over the next few weeks, Jacob tried hard to bond with me. He'd ask about my hobbies, offer to help with my homework, and even try to teach me some guitar chords. He brought me little gifts, a band t-shirt from a concert he'd been to, a set of colored pencils when he found out I liked to draw. But every time he was nice to me, it just made me angrier. I couldn't understand why my parents were so quick to welcome him into our family when I'd been an only child for 17 years. The worst part was how my parents were acting. They were constantly praising Jacob, talking about how well he'd done for himself despite his difficult childhood. We found out that Jacob had put himself through college, working part-time jobs to pay for his education. Now he was a successful graphic designer in San Francisco. My mom would cook his favorite meals, and my dad started spending weekends teaching Jacob how to fix up old cars, something I had never been interested in, but now felt jealous about. I started avoiding family dinners and spending more time in my room or up in the treehouse. When I did interact with Jacob, I was cold and distant. I could tell it hurt him, but I couldn't help it. Every time I saw him laughing with my parents or sharing some inside joke, I felt like I was being replaced. One afternoon, I came home from soccer practice to find Jacob and my dad in the garage, working on an old Chevy my dad had bought years ago but never had time to restore. They were covered in grease, laughing about something. My dad looked happier than I'd seen him in years. When he saw me, he called out, "Hey, kiddo. Want to join us?" Jacob's teaching me some tricks he learned working in an auto shop during college. I mumbled some excuse and ran inside, fighting back tears. I used to be the one my dad wanted to share his hobbies with. Now it felt like Jacob was taking my place in every aspect of our family life. Last night, things came to a head. Jacob had cooked dinner for the family, some fancy pasta dish that my parents couldn't stop raving about. As they chatted and joked, I sat there pushing food around my plate, feeling more and more invisible. They were talking about Jacob's upcoming art show in San Francisco, and how proud they were of his accomplishments. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I can't do this anymore," I said, my voice shaking. "I hate this. I hate that you're here, Jacob. You're ruining everything." The table fell silent. Jacob looked shocked and hurt, my mom gasped, and my dad's face turned red with anger. "Ava, apologize to your brother right now," he demanded. But those words just made me angrier. "He's not my brother," I shouted. "He's a stranger you invited into our home without even asking me. I never wanted him here." I ran to my room and slammed the door, ignoring my parents calling after me. I've been hiding out here ever since, ignoring their knocks and pleas to talk. I know I probably hurt Jacob's feelings, and part of me feels guilty about that. But another part of me feels justified in my anger. This isn't fair. I didn't ask for a brother, especially not one who's 10 years older than me and seems perfect in every way. How am I supposed to compete with that? Am I wrong for resenting my half-brother? Should I just try to accept him and move on? I don't know what to do. I miss how things used to be, just the three of us. But I also know I can't hide in my room forever. I'm torn between my anger and the guilt I feel for potentially ruining this reunion for everyone. Any advice would be appreciated. Update 1: It's been about a month since my outburst at dinner, and a lot has happened. I want to thank everyone who commented on my original post. Your perspectives helped me see things from different angles and gave me a lot to think about. After that night, my parents tried to force a family meeting to clear the air. I refused to participate, staying locked in my room for 2 days straight. I only came out when they were asleep or at work, sneaking food from the kitchen. Jacob tried to talk to me a few times, knocking softly on my door, but I ignored him. During those 2 days, I spent a lot of time thinking about my childhood and how it might have been different if I'd known about Jacob all along. Would we have been close? Would I have looked up to him as a cool older brother? Or would I have always felt like I was living in his shadow? I thought about all the milestones in my life, my first day of school, my first soccer goal, my first school play, and how Jacob had missed all of them. But then I realized he'd missed out on having a family to share his milestones with too. It made me wonder about his life growing up, and if he'd ever felt as lonely as I was feeling now. On the third day, I found a letter slipped under my door. It was from Jacob. The handwriting was messy but earnest, and there were a few places where the ink was smudged, as if water had dripped onto the page. In it, he apologized for disrupting my life and said he never meant to come between me and my parents. He shared some of his own feelings about growing up without a father and how excited he was to finally connect with our dad. He wrote about how he used to make up stories about his dad being a secret agent or an astronaut, anything to explain why he wasn't around. As he got older, he said, the stories stopped being fun and started to hurt. Jacob wrote about his mom remarrying when he was 5, and how his stepdad was a good man who treated him well. But he always felt like something was missing. He described the day he decided to reach out to our dad, how nervous he was, and how he almost backed out several times before finally sending that first message. But what really got to me was when he wrote about how much he had always wanted a sibling. He said he used to beg his mom for a little brother or sister, but it never happened. When he found out about me, he was thrilled at the idea of finally having a sibling, even if we didn't grow up together. He hoped we could at least try to be friends, even if I never saw him as a brother. Reading that letter made me realize how selfish I had been. I had been so focused on my own feelings that I never stopped to consider how Jacob might be feeling. It couldn't have been easy for him to reach out to a father who hadn't been part of his life, or to try to connect with a teenage sister who clearly resented him. I decided it was time to stop hiding and face the situation head-on. I came out of my room and found Jacob in the living room, strumming his guitar. When he saw me, he put it down immediately, looking nervous. "I read your letter," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry for how I've been acting. It wasn't fair to you." Jacob's face softened, and he gestured for me to sit down. We ended up talking for hours. He told me more about his life growing up, his struggles with feeling abandoned by our dad, and his hopes for building a relationship with all of us. He shared funny stories about his first attempts at cooking. Apparently, he once set off the fire alarm trying to boil water, and how he discovered his passion for art in high school. He showed me pictures of some of his graphic design work on his phone, and I had to admit it was pretty impressive. I shared my fears about being replaced and how overwhelmed I felt by the sudden change in our family dynamic. I told him about my treehouse and how it had always been my safe space. To my surprise, Jacob's eyes lit up. He told me he'd always wanted a treehouse as a kid but never had one. I found myself offering to show it to him sometime. It wasn't an instant fix, but it was a start. We agreed to try and get to know each other better, without the pressure of forcing a sibling relationship right away. The next challenge was facing my parents. They were upset about my behavior, especially my dad. We had a long, difficult conversation where I expressed my hurt over them keeping such a big secret from me and then springing Jacob's visit on me without warning. My mom cried as she apologized, saying they never meant to hurt me. She explained that they had struggled for years with how and when to tell me about Jacob. At first, they thought I was too young to understand. Then, as I got older, they worried about disrupting my life or making me feel insecure. They realized now that waiting so long had only made things worse. My dad was quieter, but I could see the pain in his eyes. He told me how guilty he'd felt all these years for not being there for Jacob, and how he saw this as a chance to make things right. But he acknowledged that in his excitement to reconnect with Jacob, he'd neglected my feelings. They apologized for not handling it better and promised to be more considerate of my feelings in the future. We agreed to have regular family meetings where everyone could express their thoughts and feelings openly. Things are still awkward sometimes, but we're all making an effort. Jacob and I have started having weekly sibling nights where we watch a movie or play video games together. It's actually been kind of fun getting to know him. He's got a great sense of humor and he's been teaching me some cool guitar riffs. Last week, I finally showed Jacob my treehouse. He was like a kid on Christmas morning, climbing up and exclaiming over every little detail. We ended up spending the afternoon up there, and I found myself telling him about some of the adventures I'd had in that treehouse over the years. It was nice to share that special place with someone who appreciated it as much as I did. My parents are trying to balance their attention between us better. They've made it clear that they love us both equally, just in different ways. My dad has even started including me in some of the car restoration projects he and Jacob work on. I'm not as interested in the mechanical side of things, but I've been helping with the design aspects, like choosing colors and interior fabrics. It's been a nice bonding experience for all of us. I'm not saying everything is perfect. I still have moments where I feel jealous or resentful, especially when I see how easily Jacob seems to fit into our family. But I'm working on it, and I'm trying to be more open-minded about having Jacob in our lives. Thank you all again for your advice and support. I'll keep you updated on how things progress. Update 2. Hey everyone, it's been about 6 months since my last update, and I wanted to share some developments in my situation with Jacob and my family. Things were going pretty well for a while. Jacob and I were getting along better, and our family seemed to be finding a new balance. We even had a fun family vacation to the beach last month, where Jacob taught me how to surf. It was nice to see my parents relaxed and happy, and I was starting to feel like maybe this whole half-brother thing could work out after all. But then, about 2 months ago, something happened that stirred up all my old feelings of resentment and insecurity. My 18th birthday was coming up, and I was excited about it. My parents had always made a big deal out of birthdays, and I was looking forward to celebrating this milestone. I had dropped hints about wanting a particular laptop for college, update 2 continued, and my parents had hinted that they had something special planned. I was also secretly hoping they might surprise me with my own car. Ever since I got my license last year, I'd been dreaming about the freedom of having my own set of wheels. The week before my birthday, I overheard my parents talking in hushed tones in their bedroom. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but I heard my name and stopped to listen. What I heard made my blood run cold. They were discussing selling my mom's cherished vintage car, a 1965 Mustang that she'd inherited from her father. It had been sitting in our garage for years, waiting to be restored. Mom had always said she was saving it to give to me on my 18th birthday. It was supposed to be a family project, restoring it together. But now, they were talking about selling it and using the money to help Jacob with a down payment on the house. Apparently, Jacob had been struggling to save up enough for a place of his own in the expensive San Francisco housing market, and my parents wanted to help him out. I was devastated. Not only were they giving away something that was supposed to be mine, but they were doing it for Jacob. All my old feelings of being replaced came rushing back. I remembered all the times Jacob had mentioned how hard it was to find affordable housing in the city, but I never thought my parents would go this far to help him. I confronted them immediately, not even trying to hide the fact that I'd overheard. The argument that followed was explosive. I accused them of loving Jacob more than me, of trying to make up for lost time with him at my expense. They tried to explain that Jacob needed the help more than I did, that they'd still get me a nice gift for my birthday, but I wasn't having it. In the heat of the moment, I said some pretty harsh things. I told them I wished Jacob had never found us, that he'd ruined everything. I even threatened to move out as soon as I turned 18 and cut contact with all of them. I brought up every little thing that had bothered me over the past months, how they seemed to hang on Jacob's every word, how they were always bragging about his accomplishments, how they changed our family traditions to accommodate him. Jacob wasn't home during this fight, but he came back in the middle of it. Seeing the confusion and hurt on his face just made me feel worse, and I stormed out of the house. I ended up going to the park where I used to play as a kid, sitting on the swings until it got dark. I ended up staying at my best friend's house for a few days, ignoring calls and texts from my family. My friend tried to help me see things from different perspectives, but I was too hurt and angry to listen. When I finally came home, the atmosphere was tense. My parents tried to talk to me, but I shut them out. Jacob kept his distance, clearly unsure of how to handle the situation. I could tell he felt guilty, even though he hadn't asked for the car or the money. My birthday came and went without much celebration. My parents did get me the laptop I wanted, but it felt hollow. The car, which I'd been dreaming about driving for years, was already listed for sale. Jacob tried to talk to me privately, offering to refuse the money, but I just walked away. I didn't want his pity or his sacrifice. It's been a month since then, and things are still strained. I'm civil to Jacob, but our budding relationship has taken a big step backward. I'm angry at my parents for what feels like a huge betrayal, and disappointed in myself for letting my negative feelings take over again. I know selling the car isn't the end of the world, and part of me feels selfish for being so upset about it. But it's not just about the car, it's about feeling like I'm second best in my own family. It's about watching my parents bend over backwards to help Jacob, while I feel like I'm being left behind. I'm not sure where to go from here. How do I move past this? Can I ever truly accept Jacob as part of our family without feeling like I'm losing something in the process? Any advice would be appreciated. Update 3. It's been almost a year since my last update, and I wanted to share how things have evolved. A lot has changed, and I've done a lot of growing up. After the car incident, our family went through a rough patch. The tension at home was unbearable, and I seriously considered moving out as soon as I graduated high school. I started looking at apartments near my chosen college, thinking maybe some distance would help. But then something unexpected happened that forced us all to reevaluate our priorities. Jacob got into a serious car accident. He was driving back from a late-night work event when another driver ran a red light and T-boned his car. Jacob was rushed to the hospital with multiple injuries, including a severe concussion and a broken leg. When my parents got the call, I saw genuine fear in their eyes. We all rushed to the hospital, and seeing Jacob lying in that bed, hooked up to machines, made all our recent arguments seem petty and insignificant. Jacob was in the hospital for weeks, and for a while, we weren't sure if he would fully recover. The doctors were concerned about potential long-term effects from his head injury. During this time, our family came together in a way we hadn't before. I found myself spending a lot of time at the hospital. At first, it was just to support my parents, but gradually, I found myself genuinely concerned for Jacob's well-being. We had a lot of time to talk during his recovery, and without the pressure of trying to force a sibling relationship, we actually connected. Jacob confided in me about his fears and insecurities. He admitted that he often felt like an outsider in our family, and that he worried he was causing problems between me and our parents. He told me about the guilt he felt over the car situation, saying he had no idea about the Mustang's significance when our parents offered to help him with the house down payment. Hearing his perspective made me see how unfair I'd been to him. I realized that Jacob wasn't trying to replace me or steal my parents' affection, he was just trying to find his place in a family he'd been separated from for most of his life. As Jacob recovered, our family began to heal too. My parents apologized for how they handled the car situation, acknowledging that they should have discussed it with me first. They explained that they were trying so hard to make up for lost time with Jacob that they lost sight of how it was affecting me. We all agreed to work on our communication and to be more honest about our feelings. My parents made an effort to show me that I wasn't being replaced or loved any less. They started including me more in family decisions, especially ones that involved Jacob. Jacob and I have found a comfortable middle ground in our relationship. We're not best friends or typical siblings, but we've developed a mutual respect and care for each other. We still have our sibling nights, but now they feel more natural and less forced. As for the car, my parents came up with a compromise. They didn't sell it after all. Instead, they're holding on to it, and Jacob and I will work on restoring it together when he's fully recovered. It's become a family project, with all of us learning about classic car restoration. It's not exactly what I had imagined, but it feels like a fair solution. I've learned a lot from this experience. I've realized that family isn't just about blood relations or who's been around longer. It's about choosing to love and support each other, even when it's difficult. I've also learned the importance of expressing my feelings openly instead of letting resentment build up. Jacob has become an important part of our family, and while our relationship isn't perfect, I'm glad he's in our lives. We're all still learning and growing, but I feel optimistic about our future as a family.